that is the reason he was almost impeached, and it's a little complicated. Basically, Watergate started in the middle of Nixon getting reelected in '72, and he was worried that the media was out to get him, and so he thought it's because people who were working for him were like giving out like secret information to make it look bad. And so he hired a group of people to find out who was doing all this stuff and to go after him. And in the process of all this, they broke into the Democratic Party headquarters in the middle of the night at a place called the Watergate Complex, which was like a multi-purpose thing. Um, you guys know like the Four Seasons high rise near the mall in Greensboro? You know what I'm talking about?
Say that again.
Do you know like the Four Seasons in Greensboro?
I think so.
You know, it's like that big mall near the
Oh
highway,
yeah,
and it's got like this high-rise hotel next to it.
yeah.
Yeah, that I don't know. If, I've been in there a few times. It's not just a hotel, but it's also like a conference center. It's got like little shops and restaurants and bars, and I think there might be a nightclub in there too. It's got like all kinds of stuff in there. Well, the Watergate complex was kind of like that one in Greensboro. There was like a hotel and there was like conference rooms and all that. And so the Democrats rented one of these out to be their campaign headquarters. The Nixon's guys broke into there and they got caught. And soon it was found out that they were working for the president. And Nixon's like, I didn't tell them to do any of that. I mean, those guys are crazy. All right, and the guys who were caught didn't snitch on Nixon. They said, hey, we're gonna fight it, or we didn't have anything to do with Nixon. We did this on our own. And Congress starts to smell something fishy going on, and they hire a special prosecutor to try to figure out what happened. And that guy learned that there were tapes of a lot of this stuff. And so Congress orders Nixon to turn over the tapes. And Nixon refuses. He says, hey, they're my personal property. I don't have to give them to you. And so this winds up going to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled 8-0 that Nixon had to turn over the tapes because they're part of a criminal investigation. Nixon turned over 3 of the tapes. One of them had an 18-and-a-half-minute gap because he erased a whole bunch of information. One of the tapes had what was called the smoking gun on it, which, proved that Nixon had something to do with the scandal. On tape, Nixon is caught calling the FBI to tell the CIA not to, or it was the other way around. He told the CIA to tell the FBI, don't investigate the Watergate scandal because it has to do with national security. That was the excuse he gave. And so he's caught on tape trying to stop a criminal investigation. That's obstruction of justice. That's a whole bunch of things. And so now Congress starts to consider impeachment, which, is a process. You saw earlier this year with Trump, and that wasn't like a one-day thing. That dragged out over a while. And so during the process in the House of impeachment, Nixon starts to ask the senators, like, hey, when it gets to you, how are you going to vote? And he found out that if it went to trial in the Senate, he was going to get convicted. He was going to get removed from office. And once that became clear to him, Nixon decided to resign first. Of course, resign is just a fancy word for saying you're doing what?
You're doing bad.
No.
Oh.
If you resign,
You're quitting.
yeah, that's what it means. If you resign, it means you quit. And so Nixon quit the presidency. He's the only president who quit the presidency because if you quit the presidency, you keep all of the benefits that ex-presidents get. Like every living president, when they retire, they get to keep their Secret Service protection. They get paid a pension every year. They get travel expenses, a presidential library opened up for them. So all of that, all of those benefits, if you quit, you keep them. But if you're thrown out of office, like Nixon was about to have done, then you lose it all. And so Nixon quit, and the guy who takes over for him is the vice president, and that vice president is Gerald Ford. I'm going to show you a couple of things in a minute. So just let me pull this up, bear with me. Whoops, that's not what I want. Because if I could play you videos, you can't hear the sound. So that's what I want. So this is Nixon after he resigned. Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is him getting on the helicopter, flying to the air base that's going to fly him out to California. When he was getting on the helicopter, he turned around to the camera and made that pose. Like, and the V that he's making with his hands is the old V. You know, you got the hippies making that sign for peace, but the original V was for victory. Like, you know, hey, I got it. You know, you thought you could beat me, but I beat you. And if you look down right here, this guy that's pretty much bald, that is President Ford, the new president. He walked him out to the helicopter. Let me get you a better picture of Ford. Ford, there he goes. Ford was the only person we ever had as president who was not elected president or even vice president. He was made president when Nixon's vice president also had to resign. Not related to Watergate, but Nixon's vice president, the earlier one, he was caught taking bribes and not paying taxes on them. And so he had to resign. Nixon put Ford in his place, and so Ford took over. Ford was a Heisman Trophy football player way back in the day. He was yeah, there he goes, back when they wore leather helmets. So that's President Ford. He was a center at the University of Michigan. And later on in World War II, he was in the Marines. So he's got a pretty neat little life story there. He was drafted by the NFL, but he chose to go to law school instead because back then the NFL didn't pay you worth hardly anything. And so Ford, you know, he's got a neat little story to him, but now he is president and he's got to deal with problems that Nixon was too busy to deal with. And the biggest problem he had to deal with was the fact that the Middle East was sending us most of our oil, and they were mad at the United States for supporting Israel in a war against them. And so the Middle Eastern countries said, we're not going to send you oil anymore. Now, the problem with that is if there's less of anything in an economy, what happens to the price of it?
Goes down?
It goes up.
If there's less of something. Say that again, Raul?
It goes up.
Yeah, it goes up, exactly. And, you know, we had like 75% of our oil coming in from over there. And so the price of oil and gas didn't just go up, it shot up, way up. And the problem is all of the food that comes to the grocery store, all of the clothes that you buy, all of the radios, TVs, electronics, everything everybody buys has to be shipped by truck, by plane, something that uses oil and gasoline. So the price of all those products go up. And so everyone's paying more for everything. And so businesses start going broke, people start losing their jobs, and you get this weird situation where you have what's called stagflation. It's the only time in American history this ever happened, because usually when people lose their jobs, prices go down because people buy less and the businesses are trying to get them to come in. But in this unique situation, you have prices going up and people are losing their jobs. And so you're getting hit from both sides. and nobody during the 70s was able to figure it out, and it hurt Ford's popularity really badly. There's a picture I wanted to show you. It's from Salisbury. Is that the one? There's one of them. It's from. You can see the sign. It says I-85 US 29, and one year I showed it, and like everybody told me exactly where it was. Now I can't find it. Oh well. Let me do it this way. Oh, this is funny. I think I'll show you both of these. All right. So let me project those. All right. So you guys see the gas station that I clicked on?
Yeah.
You see how long
Yep.
these lines are?
Mm-hmm.
You had people run out of gas waiting in line. And if you look down here, you could have a fight break out over this. And you had people like literally get into fist fights because like this guy, when he would pull up, this guy would try to move in and this guy said, no, I'm here first. That's not where the line is. And sometimes people get out of the cars and start beating each other up to get the next place in line. Because part of the problem was you would have a lot of gas stations actually run out of gas. Like you got this picture here where you would have cars run out of gas, and that's why they would back up in line. It's like people going to the grocery store at 7 a.m. as soon as they open, try to see if they can get toilet paper. It's the same thing. It's just gas instead of toilet paper. And it was really bad. And whenever anything bad happens in the economy, who's going to, or the country really, who's going to get blamed for it?
People doing the
Who's trying to
president?
Yeah, the president. They're going to blame Ford for it. And so that's going to lead you into the 76 election where Ford is trying to keep his job as president, and he's running against Jimmy Carter for president. And Jimmy Carter, let me show you a picture of him. He is the last living president from back in the day. He's the oldest president we've ever had who's still alive. He's in his mid-90s. There he is. So Jimmy Carter ran in 76 against Ford, and let me show you the map. Yeah, there we go. So the country is pretty evenly split if you look. You have most of the eastern part of the country vote for Carter, including the South. You see the South goes back to Democrat for this election because Jimmy Carter is from Georgia. He's the first Southern candidate to run for president for a long, long time. But the West votes Republican. So, and if you look at the electoral vote, it's 297 for Carter, 240 for Ford. The popular vote's even closer. So Carter wins, but it's a narrow election. And Carter promises to fix Washington. Part of the reason Carter won is because he was not from Washington. He was never elected to Congress. He was not a vice president. He was not a member of cabinet. He's a fresh face who says, hey, I know what's wrong with Washington, and I'm going to help clean it up. And I'm an honest person. I teach Sunday school. I'm a born again Christian. I'll never lie to you. And people like that message, and they voted for Carter. The problem was when he got in there, he was not able to fix the problems that Ford and Nixon had. He couldn't fix stagflation. The people got angry. So Carter, instead of saying, hey, I'm working on it, guys, because Jimmy Carter kind of talked like this, Jimmy Carter got on TV and said, "It's not my fault everything's bad. It's your fault because y'all are too angry all the time." And people didn't like that at all. And then you had the problem where the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 79. And so now we're no longer trying to be friends with the communists, which is something I talked about last week. The Soviets are never able to take over Afghanistan because, you know, they'll win all the big battles because they got more weapons and more money and they're better trained. But the Afghans, you know, they'll like hit, run, hide, come back, just like, you know, happened to us in Vietnam. And it really weakens the Russians that way. You have this hostage crisis in Iran that really messes up Carter going into the 1980 election, where you had a bunch of young Muslims who were angry at their government and angry at the United States for being friends with them. They took over Iran. They still control Iran to this day. And they made their dictator run off to the United States. They also took over the American embassy over there without any warning, really. They took everyone in the embassy hostage. Carter tried a military operation to get them out. That failed. And so the people who were there stayed there in prison, basically, for 444 days. And the news people every day would come on and say, today's the 58th day, and today's the 59th day, the 60th day. And that just wore on people and made them more and more angry with Carter because Carter looked like he didn't know what he was doing. And that's the opinion of a lot of people. Carter was a nice guy, a decent person, but didn't know how to get things done as president. And that's going to mess him up in 1980. Any questions about Nixon, Ford, or Carter for the moment?
Nope.
Okay.
Well,
All right. So we'll go on to some social stuff, not as much political. You have civil rights stuff continue on in the 70s. You have a Supreme Court decision dealing with Charlotte Mecklenburg schools in North Carolina, where the school district was busing people from different parts of town. Like you would have, and this is still true today, like if you go to like a big city like Winston, Greensboro, Charlotte, you'll have parts of the city where most of the people who live there are white, or most of the people who live in this part of town are, you know, African American or Hispanic, Latino, or what have you. And so Charlotte Mecklenburg tried to deal with school segregation by saying, okay, we'll take 25% of the kids in this neighborhood, put them on school buses, and bus them across to the other end of town. So we won't have like all white schools because this is an all white neighborhood, or all black schools because this is a black neighborhood. We'll mix them up that way by putting them on buses. And some of the parents didn't like it. They sued over it. And the Supreme Court said that you are allowed to use busing to integrate the schools. And so Boston, Massachusetts had to do that. And Boston, the parents in Boston went nuts. And there's lots of videos of this where they would like throw rocks and bottles and things at school buses, you know, attacking the kids who didn't have anything to do with it. You know, they just got caught in it. And Nixon, while this was all going on, supported the parents, you know, like, well, you know, you live in a certain neighborhood and you want to go to that school and they're not letting them go. And I don't think that's right. And so, you know, Nixon was kind of doing that thing. But Nixon is kind of weird. You know, Nixon on the one hand doesn't want forced busing, but on the other hand, Nixon supported a new government policy that still exists to this day that's known as affirmative action. And what affirmative action says, like, do any of the three of you guys have a job or have ever had a job?
No.
no.
Okay. Raul, you there? Raul's giving up. All right. So when you go apply for a job at some place on... All right. Have you had a job, Raul?
Oh yes, I had,
All
but
right.
I
Have you
retired from it.
Okay. When you filled out the application, did you ever notice the thing on there that said we're an equal opportunity employer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, all job applications and college applications, and I think bank applications are supposed to have
Actually,
that on there.
actually, now about it,
Okay. Well,
now that I'm thinking about it, it is in one separate paper.
well, the next time any of you guys apply for any of that stuff, just be on the lookout for it. Basically, what it means is that when you apply for a job or you are trying to, get promoted or anything like that, they're not supposed to hold race against you, but what they also do is they say, hey, look, in the past, we have looked at race in a bad way where, like, most of the people we hire look a certain way. And so now we're going to ask you your race and say, well, we got like 10 people who work here and 9 of them are white. So, the next time we hire somebody, we're going to try to hire someone who's not white, for example. And it doesn't mean that they have to, but that they're going to put an honest effort into trying to, and that's what affirmative action does. And it's controversial sometimes because sometimes what will happen is, like, if you get 4 people apply for a job and one of them's white and the other 3 aren't, and you're trying to hire someone who's not white, then you'll say, well, the white guy's got a college degree and experience, and these other 3 don't have a degree and they don't have experience, but we got to fill in, these racial profiles. And so sometimes, people don't like it because they say it's what's called reverse discrimination. And you have a Supreme Court case regarding that in the 70s that says there is such a thing as reverse discrimination. You had a guy called Back. He was applying to be a student at a medical school in California, and he found out that he was denied admission because he was a white guy, even though he had better test scores and a higher GPA than some of the minority students who got in. And so that's something that employers and schools have to be careful of. You also have Native Americans starting to protest. You have a group called AIM, which is the American Indian Movement. They had marches to draw attention to bad things that were going on with Native Americans. They took over Alcatraz for a little while, the old federal prison. They had a shootout with some FBI agents in South Dakota. They had a march where they marched from one end of the country all the way to the other and took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They said, you guys don't care about Indians, so we're going to take care of ourselves. So they were in the news a lot in the 70s. And they also start making laws that say you cannot discriminate against somebody because they are physically handicapped. That's the ADA Disability Act. That's why you have, ramps for buildings for people with wheelchairs, bigger size handicap spaces in parking lots and different things like that. You also have a lot of environmental events going on in the 60s and the 70s. You have this woman by the name of Rachel Carson who says that we're killing all of the wildlife in the forest and in nature with toxic chemicals. The most well-known that she talked about was called DDT, and she mentioned that the fact that bald eagles were being wiped out because of DDT. And what DDT does, it's the most effective mosquito killer ever invented, still to this day. But the problem is DDT will get into the bugs and the little critters in the forest, and then when the other critters eat the bugs, then the big animals eat the little critters, and so it moves up in the food chain. You might have heard about in science class, and it winds up in the bald eagle population. And when the bald eagles would lay their eggs and the moms would sit on them to keep them warm, the eggs would break. And so you were having very few bald eagles being born. And so their population was getting wiped out. And people read the book. They're like, oh my God, we're going to kill the national symbol of America with these chemicals. And they banned DDT, and the population started to improve again.
I think something like that happened around the coast here because, like, I remember reading about something like they had like a pesticide or something. And they got into the ocean, and the fish absorbed it, and like the brown pelicans ate it, and they had the exact same problem.
Yeah, because usually the toxins work their way up the food chain, and that's where you see all the effects of it. So because of things like that, Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, which still exists, and they were meant to enforce new environmental laws that were passed at the time. There was a warm up yesterday about a river in Cleveland catching on fire because it was so polluted. It was like full of oil and flammable chemicals. And one day the river just caught fire and was all in the news. And it wasn't like, it was like a giant fire. Like you could see it, it was huge. And so, you know, they're like, look, we got to stop dumping chemicals into the rivers and killing all the wildlife and, you know, having all these toxic chemicals, you know, spewed into the air. And so they made laws that really did make air cleaner. You know, if you do like, well, let me do it real quick. So this is before and after the Clean Air Act, just so you can get an idea. You guys see this okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is Los Angeles before the Clean Air Act and after the Clean Air Act. This is why cars have to pass emissions tests. This is why there are less factories putting chemical smokestacks in the air because of the Clean Air Act. And it made the air cleaner and healthier to breathe. And it made it illegal to dump chemicals down the drain. They have to be collected and properly recycled or disposed of so they don't get into the water supply. And so your rivers are cleaner, your lakes are cleaner, you have more fish now than you did in the 70s. You have less respiratory problems than back then, all because people understood the environment needed to be protected. You have this scandal in Buffalo, New York in the 70s called Love Canal, where they took an old canal that they never even finished and they said, well, there's this giant ditch here, let's fill it with toxic chemicals and then cover it over with dirt. They did that in the 40s and 50s, and then in the 60s and 70s, they took that land and sold it to people to build houses on. And then in the mid to late 70s, these chemical barrels started to break down and the chemicals started coming up to the surface and people were getting sick and getting cancer in that area. And they had to clean this all up, but they couldn't get the company to pay for it because the company that dumped all the waste in the ground was bankrupt and no longer existed by that time. And so they had to finally get the federal government to do all that. But the federal government didn't want to keep doing that forever. And so they made this thing called a super fund where all of the companies that make all of the toxic chemicals in the United States have to pay insurance to the federal government. So when something goes wrong, that insurance fund is going to pay for it, and it's not going to be directly paid for with tax dollars. You also have another environmental scandal in the 70s called 3 Mile Island, where you had this nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania almost explode, and it really freaked everybody out about nuclear power in the United States. They haven't built a new nuclear reactor since the 3 Mile Island scandal, and that was way back in '79 before any of the three of us were even born. So questions about any of that stuff?
Nope.
All right.
Nope.
So we got one more set of notes dealing with Ronald Reagan and his rise to power, and we'll be all set for the week. During the 70s, you start to get this rise of religion becoming more popular again, and that kind of goes hand in hand with Americans moving around within the country. A lot of Northerners are moving out of the North in the 70s, 80s, 90s. It still is going on to this day. And the reason Northerners are moving away, they're moving down south to our part of the country. They're also moving out to the West Coast. And those two parts of the country are called the Sun Belt because it's sunny and it's warm. And the reason why a lot of your businesses move to the South and the West because it's cheaper. They don't have to pay as many taxes. Their workers work for less. Like if you work in a Ford factory in Michigan, you're making like 50, 60, 70 bucks an hour. All right. If you're working in the same factory in South Carolina, you're working for 35 bucks an hour. So that's 15 bucks an hour times, 400 workers times 8 hours a day. You see how that's going to add up really fast? So a lot of your businesses move down south. Another reason people move south is when a lot of people who get older, they'll retire and move down south because it's cheaper to buy a house, so their retirement money lasts longer. Food is cheaper, electricity is cheaper, state income taxes are cheaper, and so as more and more people move to the south, the South is going to get more seats in Congress. They're going to get more electoral votes in presidential elections. And so the South gets more and more political power over time. You also have the Republican Party becoming more conservative. And Reagan is the guy who led all that. He was an actor who became the governor of California. He ran for president in 76 when Ford was trying to keep his job. He lost to Ford, but he made a very good concession speech, and everyone's like, oh crap, we picked the wrong guy. We should have picked Reagan instead of Ford. So now Reagan's this big national figure, and he is ready to go in 1980, which is what your warm-up is about today. You also have this rise of religion. You have a lot of preachers who start preaching on TV and saying, "Hey, America is not culturally what it used to be, and we need to turn back to God." And they support politicians who agree with them, and so that's going to be important because they got a big audience. So Reagan's going to run in 1980 against Carter. And Carter tries to make Reagan look scary, like, man, Reagan, he's going to start World War III. Reagan, he's too conservative for America. And so Reagan challenges him to 3 debates. Carter says, no, I'm only going to give you 1 debate. And he's going to make this debate 1 week before the election, because he's trying to make it so Reagan can't beat him. And so every time Carter says something bad about Reagan, Reagan doesn't get angry. He just laughs and says, oh, there he goes again. Jimmy Carter's trying to, say his bag of tricks. And at the end of it, he looks straight at the camera and he says, are you better now than you were 4 years ago? Can you buy more things than you could 4 years ago? Is it easier or harder to find a job than it was 4 years ago? Because remember, if anything bad happens in the United States, who are people going to blame it on?
On Ronald?
Well, he's not president yet. Who are they going to blame it on?
The president.
Who was? Who's Reagan going against?
Nixon.
Nixon quit.
I'm gonna take a guess. Could it be a Clinton?
No, Clinton's not. No one's heard of Clinton yet.
Okay.
Jimmy,
Carter.
that's it.
Carter.
Carter's the president, and Reagan says that Carter is not making America better. Carter's made America worse, and he says that very clearly and powerfully. And Reagan is able to win 41 out of 50 states. He smokes Carter. Carter is gone, and Reagan comes up with a new economic plan because that's the big reason he got elected. You know, the economy sucks and it's Jimmy Carter's fault. And so Reagan comes up with a new economic plan that people are going to call Reaganomics because they're going to say he came up with it, even though he didn't, but he's the president, so he gets the credit for it. His idea is if you cut taxes for everybody, you cut taxes on the poor and the middle class, they're going to have more money to buy stuff. If you cut taxes on the wealthy, they're going to have more money, but they're not going to buy stuff because wealthy people, you know, they buy some fancy stuff, but they don't buy a whole lot of fancy stuff. So what are they going to do if you cut their taxes? They're going to put their money back in their business. All right. And so when they put money back in their business, then what the business does is now the business has more money. The business is going to hire more workers to make more stuff. And whenever you hire more workers, now those workers have money. They're going to buy stuff. And all of a sudden, the economy starts picking back up. But because you cut taxes, the companies are making more stuff. And anytime you make more stuff, what happens to the price of things?
Weight goes up.
No, you have more stuff.
Weight goes down.
They go down.
Damn.
Remember, that was the problem in the 70s. Prices were going up. So Reagan fixed the problem of the prices because now people are making more stuff. And he fixed the problem with unemployment because businesses are hiring again. And so pretty quickly, Reagan was able to fix the economy. The other thing Reagan was dealing with was foreign policy. He was caught up in a scandal selling weapons to Iran. He was caught selling weapons to Iran, not because we were friends with Iran. Remember, we were enemies with Iran. We're still enemies with Iran. But he wanted to do that to use the money to help rebels fighting the communists in Nicaragua. When Reagan got caught, he said, well, I didn't do it. It was this crazy Marine by the name of Oliver North. It's all his fault. And so North got punished for all this stuff when most people think Reagan told him to do it. He also approved a new military plan called the SDI plan, also known as the Star Wars plan. And I've got a video clip of it. I know the audio is not going to play, but I just want you to watch the video of it and see what's going on here. So give me a minute and I'll pull that up. Let's see. That's it. It's about 2 minutes long. Yeah, I think this will work.
Oh yeah, sorry, I lost connection for a moment, so I had to rejoin.
No, you're good. I figured something like that might have happened. But we're picking up with Reagan real quick, and this is Reagan's military plan to deal with the Russians. I put on captions so you might be able to read what the guy is saying, but pay attention more to like the animations going on in the background. It's about a 2-minute clip, so just bear with it, guys.
All right.
The blue is us. The reds are the Russians.
Is that laser defense?
Yeah, that's what this is. They're still working on this in 2020. That's what the Space Force that Trump talks about is. It's to do this. So that's what Reagan spent a lot of money on. Like I said, they still haven't got it in 2020, but we're closer to it every year. When the Russians heard about this and thought that it was for real in the 1980s, the Russians were scared to death, and the Russians had to build their own version of this. Now, it cost us tens of billions of dollars in the 80s to do this, just to make up the labs and assign scientists to research it and to come up with the ideas for it. The Russians have to do the same thing, but the Russians are a lot more broke than we are, and this is going to push the Russians closer to bankruptcy, which was the whole point. Reagan is increasing the amount of military spending not to go to war with the Russians, but to make the Russians try to keep up with us, knowing that they can't keep up with us. And this is going to push the Russians over the edge into bankruptcy. And so Russia's got to figure out what they're going to do. And in the early 80s, you had 3 Russian leaders die one after the other. And so the Russians were in a mess leadership wise. And so they picked this new guy, this younger guy. He's not going to look young. You're going to have to trust me on this. A guy by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. And you're going to remember this face for a while because it's a pretty unique face. There he goes. That's Gorbachev. And he doesn't look like a young guy, but he is almost 20 years younger than Ronald Reagan is. He just got bald at an early age. And he's got that birthmark on his head that's shaped like Florida. So, people remember the birthmark. But Gorbachev was a young, healthy guy, and he knew that Russia was in a hot mess. And so he wanted to come up with new ideas about how to lead Russia to make Russia stronger against the United States in the long run. And so he said, hey, if there are things we're doing bad, the problem is everybody else was afraid to say anything because under Russia before Gorbachev, if you opened up your mouth to complain, they would send you off to a prison camp for the rest of your life, and you'd usually get worked to death or you'd freeze to death in a couple of years. Gorbachev says, no, we can't fix things if you don't tell us what the problems are. So I want you to tell us what the problems are. He also said the other problem is if people don't show up to work, they never get fired, they never get demoted or anything. We promote people for stupid reasons. We should promote people who work hard, who come up with good ideas, or if you want to start your own little business out of your house and sell, stuff on the street, like old clothes or whatever, you can keep the money. And so he's starting to make the Soviets more like the United States to try to make the Soviet Union stronger in the long run. But the problem is he doesn't go all the way. He just made people hungry for more freedom, for more private businesses. And so instead of making the Soviet Union stronger, it actually made it fall apart even faster. But Gorbachev was a decent guy and a guy that we could get along with. And so he was kind of important to that whole Cold War thing that's going on. So questions about any of that stuff?
No.
No.
All right. Do you guys have any questions about anything? grades, what we're doing over the next couple of weeks, or anything like that.
What are we gonna do anything different over the next couple of weeks, or is this gonna be like the same thing we've been doing?
I'm going to be doing the same thing we've been doing since we left because of this whole coronavirus mess. We've only got about a week and a half left before we're done with notes and assignments and all that. After that, we're just going to hang loose. So that's that as far as that goes. Anything else?
Nope.
I think we got one.
Talking about that, are we ever gonna go back to school? Because they're saying about canceling for the rest of the year.
Yeah, Governor Cooper said last Friday that the schools are going to stay closed for the rest of the year. They might not even come back in the fall. He doesn't even know. So we're not coming back to school this year. So I don't even know how they're going to handle graduation. I know there's not going to be a ceremony in May. There might not be one in June either. I don't know. I know they're going to let you come pick up caps and gowns middle part of May. Other than that, I don't really know.
You got a question too.
Yeah.
For the people who did the packets and they did the 30 questions and all, when do we turn them in? Do we turn them in when
you can, I think they've got drop boxes at the front of the school where you can drop stuff off at anytime you want to, if you've got stuff on paper. If you've got stuff electronically, you can email that to me at any time.